The massive yellow growth pulsed against the ancient oak like some alien parasite, its surface glistening with an oily sheen that caught the filtered sunlight. Dr. Brenda Garcia had spent 15 years studying forest fungi, but nothing had prepared her for this. The smell hit her first, sweet decay mixed with something chemical, something wrong. As she stepped closer, her hiking boot crunched on what she initially thought was a fallen branch. Looking down, she realized with growing horror that it was bone. The rhythmic dripping of morning dew from the towering pines created an almost hypnotic soundtrack to the macabre discovery. Brenda's breath formed small clouds in the crisp October air as she fought to maintain her scientific composure. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if nature itself was disturbed by what had manifested against the oak's ancient bark. 4 years earlier, on a crisp October morning in 2019, Kenneth Lopez had kissed his wife goodbye and driven to Yosemite alone. The 45-year-old software architect needed space to think. His marriage to Pamela was fracturing under the weight of years of accumulated resentments. His tech startup was bleeding money faster than he could raise it, and the mounting debt pressed down on him like the granite cliffs he'd spent decades photographing. Kenneth wasn't just another weekend warrior seeking Instagram-worthy shots. He was a man whose soul had been shaped by these mountains, whose earliest memories were of hiking these trails with his father, Mark Lopez, a Park Service ranger who had instilled in him a deep reverence for the wilderness. After Mark's death from cancer 5 years earlier, Kenneth's visits to Yosemite had become almost pilgrimage-like, a way to connect with his father's memory and find clarity in the cathedral-like silence of the backcountry. Kenneth was an experienced hiker who knew the park more intimately than most rangers. He'd been visiting since he could walk, mapping every trail, every hidden waterfall, every secret grove where his father had taught him to read the language of the forest. Over the years, he developed an almost supernatural ability to navigate the wilderness, earning him the nickname the Human GPS among his hiking companions. His marriage to Pamela had started strong. They'd met at a tech conference in San Francisco, bonding over their shared love of outdoor adventures and their dreams of building something meaningful together. But as Kenneth's startup, EcoTrack Solutions, consumed more of his time and attention, their relationship had begun to deteriorate. The company developed environmental monitoring systems, meaningful work that merged his love of nature with his technical skills. But the market was small and the competition fierce. His plan for this Yosemite trip was simple: 3 days on the lesser-known paths around Hetch Hetchy, capturing the fall colors through his camera lens while sorting through his life's wreckage. He'd brought his father's old Nikon, the one Mark had used to document wildlife for the Park Service, hoping that the familiar weight of the camera might help him find some perspective. Kenneth had specifically chosen the more remote areas around Hetch Hetchy because he knew they'd be largely empty of tourists. The reservoir, while beautiful, didn't draw the crowds that flocked to Yosemite Valley. He could hike for hours without seeing another soul, something he desperately needed as he tried to figure out how to salvage his crumbling world. When Kenneth failed to return Pamela's calls by evening, she wasn't immediately concerned. Her husband often lost cell service in the backcountry, and she knew he sometimes became so absorbed in his photography that hours could pass without him checking his phone. But when his silence stretched into a second day, anxiety began to creep in like fog rolling over the Sierra peaks. Pamela tried to convince herself that everything was fine. Kenneth was cautious, experienced, well-prepared. He'd left detailed information about his planned route, his expected return time, even GPS coordinates for his intended campsites. But by the third day, maternal instincts sharpened by years of worrying about Kenneth's solo adventures began screaming warnings. The search that followed was swift and professional, a well-orchestrated response that demonstrated why Yosemite's search and rescue team was considered among the best in the world. Rangers found Kenneth's rental car in the Hetch Hetchy parking area, exactly where it should be. His camping permit, properly filed and detailed, indicated he'd planned to stay at designated sites along the O'Shaughnessy Dam Trail. Search teams combed every inch of his intended route with methodical precision. Experienced trackers followed every possible path, examining every overturned stone, every broken branch that might indicate a hiker's passage. Helicopters swept the granite valleys with thermal imaging equipment, their distinctive thrum echoing off canyon walls as pilots navigated the treacherous downdrafts that made flying in Yosemite so challenging. Search dogs, specially trained for wilderness rescue, tracked Kenneth's scent to a point roughly 2 miles from the trailhead. The dogs followed the trail with their characteristic single-minded focus, noses to the ground, handlers reading their every gesture and vocalization. But then, inexplicably, near a cluster of ancient oaks in a secluded valley, the trail simply vanished. The dogs circled, whined, showed every sign of confusion as Kenneth's scent seemed to evaporate into thin air. Pamela arrived at the park on the 4th day, her face drawn with sleepless worry. She walked Kenneth's intended route with the search teams, pointing out places he'd photographed before, sharing insights about his habits that might help narrow the search area. As the days stretched on, volunteers joined the effort. Fellow hikers, members of Kenneth's hiking club, even strangers moved by the televised pleas for help. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, covering hundreds of square miles of wilderness, the active search was officially called off. Kenneth Lopez had simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and a family devastated by uncertainty. Dr. Brenda Garcia wasn't looking for a missing person when she made her discovery in October 2023. The mycologist and her graduate students were deep in Yosemite's backcountry studying how climate change affected fungal networks in old-growth forests. Their research was examining how rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns were altering the complex underground relationships between fungi and trees. They'd hiked nearly 6 miles from the nearest trail, following GPS coordinates to research sites they'd established the previous year. The work was physically demanding, hiking for hours with heavy equipment, soil sampling tools, and sophisticated monitoring devices. It was Janet Wilson, one of Brenda's most promising graduate students, who first spotted the anomalous growth. "Professor Garcia," she called out, her voice carrying a note of scientific excitement tinged with concern. "You need to see this. I've never seen anything like it." The mass covered nearly half the trunk of a 300-year-old valley oak, extending from ground level to the top. Its texture resembled brain coral crossed with hardened foam, colored in unnatural shades of sulfur yellow and bone white that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Dark veins ran through it like a grotesque circulatory system, and the surface had an oily, iridescent sheen that shifted colors as they moved around the tree. Brenda approached slowly, her scientific mind racing through possibilities. In 15 years of studying fungi, she'd seen extraordinary adaptations and bizarre growth patterns, but this defied every category she knew. The growth wasn't following normal fungal patterns, it was too localized, too dense, too strangely pigmented. "Professor, you need to see this," called Andrew Brown, another student who was photographing the base of the tree. "There's something embedded in the growth." Brenda knelt beside the massive fungal formation, her knees sinking into the soft forest floor carpeted with decades of fallen leaves. Andrew was right. Protruding from the yellow mass was what appeared to be fabric, synthetic material in a shade of blue that nature rarely produced. As her eyes adjusted to the forest shadows, more details emerged. The suggestion of a zipper, partially visible through the translucent fungal material. The outline of what might be a pocket. And there, barely visible but unmistakable, the corner of what looked like a leather wallet. With growing dread, Brenda realized they were looking at clothing that had somehow become incorporated into the fungal growth. Human clothing. And if there was clothing, there was almost certainly a human body beneath the bizarre biological formation. Park Service investigators arrived within hours of Brenda's satellite phone call, their helicopter landing in the nearest clearing large enough to accommodate the aircraft. The response team included Detective Edward Garcia from the Tuolumne County Sheriff's Office, Dr. Diane Brown, the park's chief medical officer, and Kevin Wilson, a senior ranger who specialized in backcountry investigations. The scene they encountered defied easy explanation. The fungal mass had essentially mummified whatever lay beneath it, creating what appeared to be a natural preservation chamber against the tree trunk. Detective Garcia had investigated hundreds of cases during his 20-year career, but he'd never seen anything remotely similar. Dr. Brown began her examination with methodical precision. The fungal growth had created an anaerobic environment that inhibited normal decomposition, essentially preserving whatever remained beneath. Through gaps in the formation, she could see fragments of what appeared to be bones, preserved in remarkable condition despite 4 years of exposure to the elements. The initial examination revealed fragments scattered throughout the fungal matrix. Pieces of a blue hiking jacket, scraps of what appeared to be a high-quality backpack, several metal buckles and zippers that had somehow become incorporated into the growth. Most disturbing, they found several teeth embedded in the formation like pearls in amber, their enamel still gleaming white against the yellow fungal mass. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered an intact wallet sealed within the fungal matrix. The leather showed signs of chemical treatment, as if it had been tanned by the unusual environment created by the growth. Despite 4 years of exposure, the anaerobic conditions had preserved its contents remarkably well. Inside the wallet, they found credit cards, a few bills, and most importantly, the driver's license of Kenneth Lopez. The photo showed a middle-aged man with kind eyes and graying temples, someone who looked like he'd spent his life outdoors. But the discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had Kenneth ended up pressed against this specific tree, miles from his intended route? And what had caused the unprecedented fungal response that had essentially consumed his remains? The answers began to emerge when Dr. Elena Lopez, a forensic mycologist from UC Davis, arrived to analyze the samples. Her initial examination revealed something extraordinary and disturbing. The fungal growth wasn't a natural occurrence. It was a response to specific chemicals in the soil around the tree. Her spectrographic analysis revealed traces of industrial-grade formaldehyde, benzene, trichloroethylene, and other toxic compounds that had no business being in the pristine wilderness of Yosemite. This is essentially a chemical dump site, Dr. Lopez explained to the assembled investigators. Someone has been burying industrial waste here for years, creating a toxic environment that triggered this unprecedented fungal response. The implications were horrifying. Someone had been using this remote location as an illegal waste disposal site, poisoning the ecosystem and creating a biological hazard in one of America's most treasured natural areas. Working carefully with archaeological precision, investigators uncovered fragments of photographic equipment embedded in the toxic soil. A camera lens, cracked but still recognizable. Parts of a tripod. And most significantly, a waterproof hard drive case that had protected its contents from both the elements and the chemical contamination. The hard drive contained thousands of images from Kenneth's final days in Yosemite. The photos told a story that investigators pieced together like a puzzle. Earlier images showed Kenneth's usual subjects: sweeping landscapes, intimate details of forest life, the play of light and shadow on granite cliffs. But as the timestamps progressed toward the date of his disappearance, the images began telling a different story. Kenneth had apparently stumbled upon something that disturbed his artistic vision of the wilderness. Photos showed tire tracks where no vehicle should have been, disturbed soil in pristine meadows, and chemical stains on rocks and vegetation. The final photos were the most revealing. showing trucks and heavy equipment in the forest, workers in hazmat suits handling barrels of chemicals, and most damning of all, a clear shot of a license plate. The timestamp showed these photos were taken just hours before Kenneth's final contact with the outside world. The license plate belonged to Jeffrey Brown, owner of Apex Hazardous Waste Disposal, a company based in Modesto that specialized in handling industrial chemicals for manufacturing companies throughout Central California. When investigators raided Jeffrey's business, they found evidence of systematic illegal dumping spanning 5 years. Jeffrey's business model was cynically simple: charge clients for proper disposal, then avoid the expensive legal disposal process by simply dumping the waste in remote wilderness areas throughout California. Legal hazardous waste disposal could cost hundreds of dollars per barrel, while illegal dumping cost nothing more than fuel and labor. The scheme had started small but expanded as Jeffrey became greedier, ultimately including some of California's most pristine wilderness areas, national forests, state parks, and ultimately Yosemite itself became his personal toxic waste repository. Under interrogation, Jeffrey initially denied everything, but when confronted with soil samples that matched chemicals traced to specific clients of his company, his story began to fall apart. Dr. Lopez's analysis had revealed that the chemicals contained unique marker compounds that could be traced to specific industrial processes, creating an unbreakable chain of evidence. Eventually, Jeffrey's carefully constructed facade crumbled. In a confession that lasted over 6 hours, he detailed years of illegal dumping and revealed the tragic truth about Kenneth's final day. Kenneth had been photographing fall colors when he'd heard the sound of heavy machinery where no such equipment should have been present. Following the sound, he discovered Jeffrey's crew dumping barrels of chemical waste near the ancient oak grove. As someone who'd grown up in these mountains, whose father had devoted his life to protecting this wilderness, Kenneth had been outraged. He'd confronted Jeffrey and his crew, demanding they stop poisoning the ecosystem and threatening to report them to authorities. Kenneth had been particularly incensed because the dump site was near a natural spring that fed into Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, potentially affecting the drinking water for millions of Californians. The confrontation had escalated quickly. Jeffrey, facing potential criminal charges and the collapse of his lucrative business, had panicked. In the struggle that followed, Kenneth had fallen and struck his head on the oak tree's exposed root system. The impact had been fatal. Rather than call for help, Jeffrey had made a decision that haunted him for years afterward. He'd ordered his crew to bury Kenneth's body at the base of the oak tree, using the same toxic chemicals they'd been dumping to try to accelerate decomposition and hide the evidence. But Jeffrey had fatally underestimated the biological systems he was dealing with. The embalming chemicals and other toxic compounds created an environment where normal decomposition couldn't occur. Instead, the tree's fungal network had responded to the chemical cocktail by creating the massive growth that preserved Kenneth's remains in a biological time capsule. Jeffrey Brown was convicted on multiple counts including manslaughter, environmental crimes, conspiracy, and operating an illegal waste disposal operation. The prosecution argued that his actions represented one of the most egregious cases of environmental destruction in California's history. Pamela Lopez gave victim impact testimony that moved the courtroom to tears. She spoke about the 4 years of uncertainty she'd endured, not knowing whether her husband was alive or dead. Kenneth died trying to protect the wilderness he loved, she told the court. His final act was one of environmental heroism. Jeffrey received a 25-year sentence without the possibility of parole for 10 years. The cleanup of the illegal dump sites he created throughout California took more than 2 years and cost taxpayers over $50 million. The Yosemite site required particularly intensive cleanup due to its proximity to the reservoir and its location within a protected ecosystem. Dr. Brenda Garcia's discovery led to significant changes in how environmental scientists monitor protected areas. Her research expanded to include protocols for detecting chemical contamination in wilderness areas. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of protected areas to environmental crime, leading to new monitoring systems throughout the national park system. Pamela Lopez finally had answers about her husband's fate, though the truth brought little comfort. In the months following Jeffrey's conviction, she established the Kenneth Lopez Environmental Protection Foundation, dedicated to monitoring and protecting wilderness areas from illegal dumping and other environmental crimes. Kenneth always said that these mountains were sacred places that belonged to future generations. Pamela explained at the foundation's launch, "The best way to honor his memory is to make sure his death wasn't in vain." The foundation funded graduate research, supported enforcement efforts, and provided resources for communities affected by environmental contamination. It also established education programs that taught people how to recognize signs of illegal dumping and environmental crime. Kenneth's camera equipment, recovered from the fungal growth, was restored and donated to the foundation. The images he'd taken during his final days became powerful tools for educating people about the threats facing protected areas and the importance of environmental vigilance. The ancient oak still stands in Yosemite's backcountry, its trunk now bearing scars from the removal of the unusual growth. Park rangers have designated it as an unofficial memorial to Kenneth Lopez, installing a small plaque that identifies him as someone who died protecting the wilderness he loved. The site has become a pilgrimage destination for hikers and environmental advocates who want to pay their respects to Kenneth's sacrifice. Each year on the anniversary of his death, the foundation organizes a memorial hike to the oak tree, with participants including family members, friends, and environmental activists who want to honor his memory. Dr. Garcia continues her research in the area, now expanded to include monitoring for chemical contamination. Her work has revealed that Jeffrey's dumping caused more extensive damage than initially realized, with traces of toxic compounds found in groundwater sources miles from the original dump sites. The tree itself has begun to recover from the trauma, with new bark slowly covering the scars. The surrounding forest shows signs of gradual recovery as natural processes work to neutralize the remaining toxins. But the memory of what happened there remains, preserved not just in official records, but in the living memory of the forest itself. The case of Kenneth Lopez serves as a reminder that environmental protection requires constant vigilance, and that sometimes the greatest threats to our natural heritage come from human greed and the willingness to sacrifice the common good for private profit. His death was a tragedy, but his legacy continues in the work of those who carry forward his commitment to preserving the wilderness for future generations.